Hello, it is June 19th, and this is Criminal Behaviorology. I am your host for Criminal Behaviorology, Timothy Joseph. It is Juneteenth is the day today, which is June 19th, Tuesday. I was not sure I was going to make a broadcast. This is probably going to be a short one, but it has to do with something that's important. And you may have heard about the concept of facilitated communication for those suffering from autism disorder. And this is not exactly suited to criminal behaviorology in the way that we would typically think. It's not exactly a crime, but in a sense, I think it is a crime. I think it's fraud, and I think it needs to be discussed. So I came across this abcnews.go.com article. Michigan family alleges harrowing misconduct by police. This was from June 6, 2012. Well, it's not just the police that committed misconduct. Um, it is a whole idea of being able to show parents or guardians that autistic people those ones that don't happen to have the ability to communicate, can now communicate with this idea of facilitated communication, which I will go through with shortly. And I'll in the show notes, I will go ahead and include the link to the ABC News story, and it has a video along here. Miracle or Nightmare. It's by Thomas Berman and Jonathan Balthazar, June 6, 2012. In a quiet suburban community north of Detroit, one Michigan family thought it was witnessing a miracle. After years of silence, their autistic daughter seemed to be finally communicating and even excelling in school. Little did family members know that the technique that seemed to open their daughter's world would provide fodder for an aggressive police investigation that nearly tore the family apart. And I like this article actually because it combines the fraud of facilitated communication with the common fraud of these accusations of abuse, such as the McMartin sexual abuse case in California many years ago. It combines those two frauds. It's not that people aren't abused, because they are, but these false allegations and this recovered memory idea is similar to this. This is not what happened in this story, but the recovered memory idea, that all of a sudden people recover memories, those are often very questionable, which is a subject of another show. But I'll get back to the story. The story of the Windrow family's agonizing ordeal began with hope. Diagnosed with autism at age 2, their daughter, Aislinn, was severely disabled, so much so that she couldn't communicate. But in 2004, the West Bloomfield, Michigan family thought the girl had experienced a breakthrough. A technique called facilitated communication seemed to allow uh, Aislinn's, AISLINN, to communicate what she was thinking. The technique involved a trained person called a facilitator who holds a disabled person's arm while they type on a keyboard. For Aislinn, this seemed miraculous. For the first time in her life, she now appeared to be able to answer questions, complete grade level schoolwork, and even write poetry. By the time she graduated middle school, a teacher had told the Windrows that Aislinn wanted to go to college and become a professor. All those dreams we had thought were dashed are back, and now maybe she will go to college and have a real job and had a lot more independence in her life, her mother, Tolly Windrow, remembered. Those dreams were soon replaced by a nightmare. In high school, Iceland was paired with a new facilitator for the facilitated communication idea, Cindy Scarcella. On November 27, 2007, using FC, facilitated communication, Iceland typed out something no one expected. Quote, "My dad gets me up, he puts his hands on my private parts," unquote. With just a few keystrokes, Iceland had supposedly accused her father, Julian Wendrow, of the unthinkable sexual assault as recently as the previous weekend. The school, Brazier said, reported the allegations. Child Protective Services immediately removed Iceland and her younger brother Ian from the home, and the local prosecutor's office sprang into action. According to Brazier, the Oakland County Prosecutor's Office had a reputation on sex cases. There was a sense they'd never met a child who hadn't been molested, Brazier said. If an allegation was made, they would charge immediately. 2 days after the initial allegations, Iceland was brought to a special county agency to meet with investigators. Once again, Scarcella was by her side, even though the Wendrows, along with facilitated communication experts, advised investigators to bring a different facilitator, one with no knowledge of the allegations. That didn't happen. With Scarcella's help, Iceland seemed to divulge even more sensational details about alleged sexual abuse by her father, saying the abuse had started when she was just 6 years old, and that her father had taken naked pictures of her, and they had forced her younger brother Ian to take part in the abuse as well, while her mother did nothing to stop the abuse. Is a video segment that goes along with the story there. The girl's name is pronounced Aislinn, apparently Aislinn. And also, I am broadcasting here from the beautiful Turkey Run State Park here in Marshall, Indiana. In case you ever want to stop by, you like state parks and nature, it's fabulous over here. But I'm going to continue with the segment now. The allegations were doubly painful for the Wendrows. Knowing the allegations of horrific abuse through facilitated communication were untrue, they realized that all of Aislin's apparent accomplishments had to be equally false. In other words, the facilitated communication was false. "We had to swallow a pretty bitter pill," Tally Wendrow said. "It became pretty clear that we were wrong." The Wendrows' lawyer, Deb Gordon, said that Aislin's new facilitator, Scarcella, had just 1 hour of unpaid training before starting to work with Aislinn. Of all the people who had ever done FC with Aislinn, she knew the least about it, Gordon said. Red flags don't stop the investigation. Well, the Wendrows were ready to give up on Scarcella and facilitated communication. Investigators weren't. The Wendrows alleged that in their zeal to prosecute, investigators missed key red flags. There was, "I have a charge, this guy's guilty, we are going to set about trying to hang him, don't bother us with the facts," Gordon said. That's how he described it. In this first interview with Aislinn and Scarcella, the girl seemed to make telling mistakes. Through Scarcella, Aislinn typed the wrong names for both her grandmother and the family dog. Undeterred, investigators searched the Wendrows' home for the naked pictures Aislinn had supposedly alleged her father had taken. They found nothing. Investigators took Aislinn to a medical exam. A nurse found, quote, "no acute injury," unquote. Meanwhile, others questioned the heart of the case, that Aislinn was able to communicate at all. Brazier said that as soon as her first story on the Wendrows was published, she got a call from one of Aislinn's former teachers. Quote, she said, quote, "there is no way this child is able to type," and I said, "that's not what the police and prosecutors are saying," Brazier told 2020. She said if you said to Aislinn, "point to the sky," the child would not be able to do it. Reporter Chris Cuomo met with Aislinn and asked her to point to the letter B. This time there was no facilitator to help her, and Aislinn couldn't correctly identify the letter. Once you admit that Aislinn Wendrow couldn't read, then the next logical conclusion is, well, then she never could have said anything through facilitated communication. She couldn't have typed, Gordon said. It all led to a disturbing conclusion, one that scientists had been reaching for years. Long before the Wendrow case, facilitated communication is fake. Studies have found repeatedly that children using facilitated communication weren't actually revealing their inner thoughts. Facilitators were typing for them, either consciously or unconsciously, leading children's hands like a psychic over a Ouija board. You know those things, those witch boards? It's spelled Ouija, but it's Ouija. We had one. We just moved the little instrument around the board, and it's supposed to reveal something mystical or something from the supernatural or predict the future or whatever. Back to the story, but the red flags in the case didn't stop the investigation. While it proceeded, Aislinn and her younger brother Ian were left in juvenile homes, allowed no contact with their parents. I thought I was feeling what I would have felt if they had actually died. I felt that depth of loss, Tally Wendrow said. I didn't know if I would see them again. Police mislead teenage boy during tearful questioning. Ian, 13, wasn't just taken from his home. He was also brought into police for questioning without the consent of an adult. Footage of police interview at West Bloomfield Police Headquarters show a detective named Joseph Brussau, Brusseau, questioning Ian for more than an hour. It's obvious you know what happened between you and your sister. There's no doubt about it, he told the boy. It's a little bit leading. Brussel lied to Ian when he told him, the young boy, that he had just received a phone call confirming they had concrete evidence against his father beyond Aislinn's statements. As Brussel maybe pressed Ian for details again and again, the pressure started to break the young boy down, bringing him to tears. And that, by the way, is you should be careful. Sorry, but you should be careful talking to the police. And they get you in a situation and they break you down, and that's how they often get confessions out of people that aren't true. Sorry to say, but that does go on. And when Brussel didn't get the answers he was looking for, he turned hostile. You're not a good liar, buddy, he told Ian. Ian eventually offered the only information he could think of, that his father had showered with Aislinn because she couldn't wash herself. Ian also said his dad would joke around with him by flashing him. Brussau's report went into detail about the showering and the flashing, but said little about Ian's repeated denial that he witnessed any abuse. Brussau declined to speak to 2020 in sworn testimony. Brussau later described his misleading statements to Ian as, quote, tactics, unquote, necessary to get the boy to reveal what he knew. Ian Aislinn were both shuffled from home to home, with Ian eventually placed in a juvenile facility in Pontiac, Michigan. I was moved in with kids who were, like at the time, 17, 18, he said. Quote, they were much older than me, who had actually been abused. It was scary. Tally Wendrow was under strict orders not to have any contact with her son. When Ian called her, she hung up. Quote, I was so afraid if they somehow found out I'd had contact with him, it'd be all over. She remembered. I just sobbed, unquote. Father put in solitary confinement. On November 5th, 2007, 8 days after the sex abuse allegations surfaced, police arrested both Tally Wendrow and her husband, Julian. Tally Wendrow was released on bail and sent home with a tracking device. But her husband wasn't as lucky. Julian Wendrow was placed in the Oakland County Jail. He remained there for the next 80 days, most of that time in solitary confinement. The charges Julian Windrow faced brought them with a potential 75-year sentence. The man who sent Windrow to jail, Oakland County Prosecutor David Gorseca, would later say in sworn deposition that his office was prosecuting a legitimate charge that Windrow was abusing his daughter. I had an opinion which there was abuse in the house, he said in the deposition. Facilitated communication, fake? Despite questions of the legitimacy of facilitated communication, Gorseca found it hard to believe that facilitator Cindy Scarcella was just making up the accusations. If someone is just holding the wrist or elbow, they're leading. That means they're lying for the person, he said. That seems a little far-fetched, he said. But it wouldn't be the first time questions were raised about whether a facilitator made up sexual abuse allegations. As Hugh Downs reported in 2020, in 1994, a facilitator in Maine was found to have contracted sex abuse allegations on behalf of a girl she thought she was helping. That facilitator later apologized to the girl's family. Howard Shane, who runs the Communication Center for Autistic Children in Children's Hospital, Boston, said he's been involved in a dozen cases in which parents have felt troubling false accusations that surface through facilitated communication. Shane, who has studied this phenomenon, said his best explanation of what is going on is something calls the savior effect. The savior effect. If you think what you are really going to help someone, that alone drives you to put reality aside. Interesting. The Windrows would have a chance to put the legitimacy of facilitated communication on trial during a court hearing. A judge ordered a special hearing during which Aislinn would answer questions that our facilitator Cindy Scarcella couldn't hear, assuring that the answers could only come from Aislinn. While facilitating in the past, Scarcella had always been present for the questions. To block out the sound, prosecutors suggested Scarcella wear headphones they had on hand. Shane, who was in the courtroom at the time, immediately objected, recognizing that the headphones the prosecutors wanted to use would block out the sound, would in fact make it easier to hear the questions. The headphones were designed to only block ambient noise. Shane alerted the court of the problem. If I hadn't been there, they would have proceeded. The facilitator would have heard the question. It would have looked like she was typing the answer. I think it would have been the end, she said. I think Julian Windrow would probably be in jail today. Jeez. The judge rejected the headphones and ordered Scarcella sent out of the courtroom each time a question was asked. When she returned, the results were dramatic. Her responses to simple questions like, "Are you a boy or a girl?" were either gibberish or incorrect attempts at an answer. The Windrows felt it obvious the case had fallen apart, but the prosecution saw it differently when Scarcella helped Aislinn type, "I am afraid," like afraid. They spell it AFRID, but as if it was afraid. Prosecutors were convinced that Ms. Aislinn was afraid of her father. That's why she answered the questions as she had. But Shane said it was Scarcella who was afraid. When she was unable to answer, she resorted to the strategy I had seen several times before. "I'm afraid I didn't want to respond," he said. Julian Windrow was sent back to solitary confinement. The case dogged on for another month before the charges against him were eventually dropped. The prosecutors claimed they were doing so only because Aislinn would no longer cooperate because she can't communicate. No apologies. The family was finally reunited, but the emotional impact of the ordeal lingered. For 6 months, Aislinn would become frantic if her father was out of sight for too long, the family said. She was clearly traumatized by it, and we have no way of knowing how, to what extent, and to fix that. After his harrowing police interrogation, Ian began seeing a therapist. "They had really done a number on my head," he said. With damage done to their reputation and relationships, the Windrows sued the police, prosecutors, their daughters, school district, and state agencies involved in the case. They alleged 61 different counts of misconduct. Before the case went to court, the police department responsible for Ian's interview settled for $1.8 million without admitting wrongdoing. The prosecutor's office was defiant. Corsica insisted he did nothing wrong, was also that his office was, under the law, immune from liability. There's a legal body of case law out there that says as long as you're wearing your prosecutor hat, you can say or do anything, and you're protected, Gordon, the Windrow's lawyer, said. The judge in the lawsuit called the investigation of the Windrows a runaway train, unquote, but nevertheless accepted prosecutors' immunity claims and dropped most of the civil charges against them. Corsica, who is now in private practice, declined requests for an interview from 2020, but did speak in 2009 about the Windrow case to the National Law Journal. When asked if the Windrows deserved an apology, he responded, "Over my dead body." Cindy Scarcella, who now works at a clothing store at a shopping mall, also declined to speak with 2020. In sworn testimony, Scarcella had denied she ever intentionally made up anything she helped Aislinn to type. She denied it. Well, she may not realize it, but that's what she's done. Today, the Windrows are awaiting a trial on the claims the judge has not dismissed. The family says their lives will never be the same. The stigma of the allegation hasn't gone away, and some will always be suspicious. Julian Windrow said he'd like an apology, but what I would really like is for the system to be fixed, don't we all? Man, I don't want this to happen to anybody else. Someone can say something, can construe, can make an allegation, and before you can blink, you are in a cauldron of chaos, he says. And we could have a whole segment on false allegations of sexual abuse. This story is something else. Watch the video of it, if you can link to the video section of it. This stuff's really frightening. And so you have you've got the tendency, similar to the Martin sex abuse case in California, which they made an excellent movie out of, and other allegations of sexual abuse that are frauds. Not there are some that are real, but there are some that are frauds, and they're often based around these strange things like recovered memory, or now facilitated communication, where suddenly autistic people that can't talk or communicate in any way, all of a sudden this facilitator comes in and says, "Oh, we can talk. It's snake oil. It's a fraud." Unfortunately, sometimes the facilitators themselves can believe it, just like a Ouija board, where it's you might say, "I know this is a behavior analysis show, but it may be an unconscious process in a sense of where they think they are communicating something and they're not. The facilitators think they're communicating something and they're not." Some of the comments here. I find it shocking that this facilitator was obviously typing for the girl, which resulted in this false allegation, as well as getting the parents' hopes up for years that their daughter was functioning at a higher level than she was. The facilitator needs charged with something. Yeah, it's a lot of those kind of comments on it. Yeah, I agree with it. This is less a case of police misconduct than facilitator misconduct. Well, yeah, this is gross misconduct, and it's really taking advantage of, I think, parents' own insecurities, that they always wanted the best for their child, and someone comes along and they say, "Oh, this can work," and no one questions it. I've heard this facilitated communication stuff in conferences. People actually believe this, but it is a fraud, and this was an explosive combination where it turned into a child sexual abuse allegation. Incredibly tragic. These kinds of things need to be verified from multiple sources, from the literature, And that's how we determine. It's not just someone claims to be an expert and they like to work with autistic people or whatever. Does the literature and experimental and observational studies, experimental work and then observations by experts, does that support this contention? Has it been peer reviewed? That kind of thing is what we're looking for. Anything short of that, there is a great potential for fraud and for great harm. So this is Timothy Joseph. I'm out here at Turkey Run State Park. It's beautiful. Pay it a visit sometime or somewhere where there's a lot of nature. I really appreciate your time. This is criminal behaviorology.